Well, we'd like to welcome everyone to the Forest City Historical Society. Tonight's presentation by the renowned John Revak of Simpson.
I thought I bored you guys enough last year that I'd never be back, but it just didn't work out.
Last year he did a presentation for us, a 3D presentation of local history, and that was a big hit. Tonight's presentation is going to be on the Gravity Railroad. Am I right, John?
You are right, Mr. Homicide.
I want to make sure.
Well, even if you were wrong, I wouldn't admit to it, and I would change the presentation as we speak to make sure you were right.
You're that good.
I'm that good. I have eight presentations.
Well, since you're that good, I'm going to let you take over.
I can adapt easily.
Well, right, go ahead, John.
Good evening, everyone. When I do the presentation, I know there are people who probably know things about the Gravity Railroad, but I always assume that my audience doesn't know anything about it. That's how I was taught in business communications. Talk to people like, you know, you're talking to newbies who don't know anything about it. So, why did we need a gravity railroad? Oh, I see more people coming. Oh, no, sorry, they're just closing. Why did we need a gravity railroad? Well, when it comes to history, I always get a little irritated when people who talk about history and they get into this memorization thing. Well, on this date this happened, on that date this happened, on that date this happened. To me, history is driven by consumer behavior. And I'm going to give you many examples of, you know, through the gravity, how consumer behavior changed what we do. So again, why did we need a gravity? Well, in 1808, Judge Jesse Fell first burned anthracite coal in an open grate. Prior to that, people didn't want anthracite coal. It was sticking up out of the ground. Nobody cared because it was hard to start burning and hard to keep burning. So once he created a market for it and consumer behavior changed and people started heating and using anthracite coal, we had plenty. We're in part of the anthracite coal fields that extends all through eastern Pennsylvania. Okay, but we had more coal than we need, right? So we needed a market for our coal. Well, like I just said, you're in Forest City, which is the northernmost point of the anthracite coal fields. It extended through eastern Pennsylvania. Well, the mines in Shenandoah, Mahanoy City, Pottsville, St. Clair, all of those, they shipped their coal to Philadelphia and Baltimore. Coal is a heavy commodity. If we had to ship it from up here, it would have been too expensive for the people in Philadelphia to buy when they could buy it cheaper from those places. So they decided, how do we get our coal to New York City? That's our market. Again, consumer behavior, New York wants our coal. Now, ideally, if you could float coals in barges, that would be great. So they dug a canal. And when I'm talking about history, I'm always amazed what amazes people nowadays. Nowadays, people look into a set of virtual glasses and they're transported somewhere and they think this is amazing, but it's all just computer code, right? They dug a 108-mile-long river from Honesdale to Rondout, New York, where they could run canal boats. I mean, think about that. There was no heavy equipment in the 1820s. They physically dug a 108-mile-long river. But now we got it to Honesdale, and they were originally trying to figure out how to get it to Carbondale. They had a big problem, though, the Music Mountains. How do you get coal over the Music Mountains? You don't have a river, you know the Lackawanna River runs down the Lackawanna Valley. The Dyeberry Creek runs through Honesdale. You need a steady flow of water to be able to run a canal. So the decision was made, we're going to make a gravity railroad. Now, again, a lot of people say to me, why do you call it a gravity railroad? Well, there were no locomotives on this railroad because, again, you had to get over the mountain. A locomotive can only climb a 2% grade. Now remember, this is 90 degrees, right? This is 45 degrees. 2% is almost nothing. But remember, a train wheel is smooth, train track is smooth. So the wheels would just keep spinning if you tried to run a locomotive. So how do you solve this? Well, there are simple tools. On the railroad, they had planes and levels. A plane is a simple tool. This is an inclined plane. If you have to, sorry, this is a better way to, if you have to lift something straight up, it's very hard to lift. But if you can drag it up an inclined plane, you use a lot less effort. So they contoured the land and they built essentially steps over the mountain, these inclined planes. You instead of having a locomotive try to get up a hill, you put a stationary engine on top of the hill, hill and run a cable down the hill and then pull the cars up to the top of the first plane. The area beyond the plane is called the level. So when you're coming up the plane, you're working against gravity. When you're on the level plane beyond the head of the plane, you are on the level area, you're working with gravity because the cars are now rolling to the next base of the next plane. And again, it was a number of steps over the mountain on one side and then down the mountain to Waymart on the other side. So I just want to make sure people understand what, the planes and the levels are. Also, I'm going to be referring to areas called the heavy track and the light track, which is kind of obvious from the description. When the coal cars were full, that was the heavy track. When they're empty, it's the light track. This is not always the case, and we're going to see that in the presentation. History sometimes is not black and white. And actually, history is a matter of perspective at times. When we were kids, we learned about, in the Civil War, you had the famous Battle of the Ironclads, the Monitor and the Merrimack. Do you know why you know it's the Merrimack? Because are you originally from Pennsylvania?
Pretty much, born in Binghamton, raised in Northeast Pennsylvania.
Okay, if you grew up above the Mason-Dixon line, which is the southernmost border of Pennsylvania, it was the Monitor versus the Merrimack, because the Merrimack was a sailing ship. It was a schooner that was captured by the Confederacy. They took off the mast, they took off all the sailing paraphernalia, but you name a ship by the hull. When the hull is built, that's when you name the ship. So to Northerners, it will always be the Monitor versus the Merrimack. But if you are from below the Mason-Dixon line, you learned about the Monitor versus the Virginia, because the Confederacy renamed it to the Virginia. So again, same history, different perspective on the gravity. If you go to anyone in Waymart or Honesdale and you ask them, when did passenger service start on the gravity? They will proudly say, and they even put it in their pamphlets, passenger service started in 1877. They're partially right. It started to Waymart and Honesdale in 1877. But passenger service started in the lower part of the gravity between Carbondale and Oliphant as early as 1859. They took some lumber cars, which were just flat cars, nailed some benches on them, and they actually ran passenger cars. Now, the gravity is a one-way railroad. When you got on it in Carbondale, you rode up to Honesdale, rode back through Waymart, out to Oliphant, then up to Carbondale. So how is it possible that we could have passenger service in 1859 on what was called the Valley Line? There were three distinct parts of the gravity. The area between Carbondale and Honesdale was called the Valley Line. The part of the gravity that went over the mountain was called the Mountain Line, L-I-N-E, not L-I-O-N, the Mountain Line, and it was the Honesdale Line from Waymart up to Honesdale. So we're going to see how you could possibly have, because it's a one-way continuous railroad. So how do you have passenger service on only part of it in 1859? You're going to see that. There were areas of the gravity where the heavy track and the light track ran close together. They built switchbacks. And again, we're going to see that in pictures and maps. So you could ride from Carbondale to Oliphant on the Valley Line in a loop without ever going to Honesdale, without ever going to Waymart. But again, history is a matter of perspective. So are they right? Well, they're right from their perspective because they didn't see passenger service until 1877. Okay, so let's get into our presentation. And this is the most animation you get out of me. I'm low tech. So this is what I was just talking about, how you created steps in the gravity. You have planes, number one started in Carbondale, and you're climbing up the mountain on one side and climbing down on the other side. So you have the inclined planes and then the levels. The gravity went through different configurations over the years when it started in 1829. What we're going to look at today is the last configuration, which was from the 1860s. Now, the photographer who took the earliest photos of northeastern Pennsylvania was a man by the name of Thomas Johnson. He took a series, the gravity was having an expansion in the 1860s, and the management of the D&H came from their main office into our area, and he prepared a series of photographs. And this is Carbondale in 1860, but what I want to point out to you is, you see the plume of smoke up here? That's the engine house at the top of plane number 1, and you have plane number 2, and it's hard to see plane number 3, but those are the smoke from the stationary engines at the engine house at the top of the plane. Now, we're going to arrive at the station, 1860. You see the gravity shop is back here, and most people look at this building and they say, oh, I know that building, it's the Ben Mar. No, it's not. In case you notice, there's only 4 windows across, and the entry is at ground level. Now, I don't know whether this building was torn down and a new building was put up, or this building was expanded. But, let's see, we should have it. At one time, the D&H, here, now, this is the Ben Mar back here. You had now these buildings show 6 windows across, where the building you just saw had 4 windows across, and it was much smaller than these. But at the D&H, when it was at its greatest, you had 2 full office buildings on Main Street. So you had 2 matching Ben Mars, if you will. So I don't know if that building was torn down or if it was expanded. That's the one thing I'm not sure about. But everybody assumes when they see it, that's the Ben Mar. So here we are at the bottom of plane 1. I'm sorry, I feel wherever I stand I'm blocking somebody. We have all the cars that either came from Carbondale up the valley, ready to go up on their way to Honesdale. You have all the shops which were torn down over the last years. We have passenger cars. We have mules and horses hauling cars with lumber. That's one thing. We always associate the gravity with coal, but it carried all kind of, there were freight cars, it carried all kind of merchandise. The one year in the I think it was 1835 I was looking at, it carried 3 million board feet of lumber. Because again, it was carrying it out to Honesdale, which was going out to Rondout, and it was going to the market. And the canal boats that came back from Rondout were also bringing materials to our area. I think in later years, I think the Dorflinger Glass Works, I'm trying to remember what they used for making glass. Is it potash or some kind of material they would bring barrels of back on the canal. And again, materials would come into our area over the gravity.
John,
yes.
Question. Where, like that last picture, where would that be now? What were we?
That's right behind where the Ben Mar is.
Right
where, yeah, that whole thing. There was a whole series of buildings there. And, well, here, this is where we would get on the passenger cars. This is, the D&H passenger cars, the closed, you're getting on behind, again, the Ben Mar. So you had the I keep calling it the Ben Mar. This is the D&H office, and there's a station over here. You have an open-air car. This car in particular, you'll notice there's a medallion on the side of the car. If you go to the Wayne County Historical Society, this car is sitting in the Wayne County Historical Society, and me being the history geek I am, I've been there maybe 100 times, and I don't even watch the video anymore. I just sit in the car because I say to myself, 150 years ago, there's a car that ran from Carbondale to Honesdale, and I can sit in that same car today, and it's in quite nice condition, actually. So here we are, we get on the car in Carbondale on our way up to Honesdale. So this is the start of our trip once we've stopped in Carbondale. Now, we move over, you move the cars to the head of plane, or the bottom of plane number 1. Now, you remember I said how you define a plane. I mean, on the gravity you had numbered planes 1 through 28. So when you ask people how many planes were there, well, there's at least 33 and possibly more. Because it all depends on how you define a plane. This plane here is actually coming down. There was a coal breaker on Belmont Street, off of Belmont Street. We're going to see a picture of it in a minute. They brought the coal from Belmont Street down to plane number 1 to then ship off to Honesdale. So this is the plane that you're going up. This plane, you see there's actually coal cars there that would be coming down the plane to come down to Carbondale. And again, we're going to see numerous cases where there are multiple things that you can define as another plane. So let's say the number of planes on the D&H is variable. So we're going to leave now. Now, someone showed me once a railroad lantern. They came to me and they said, this was used on the Gravity. I said, no, there were no lanterns on the Gravity. The way you signaled on the Gravity, and we're going to see in a later picture, there were posts that had a wire that carried, the wire went from the bottom of the plane to the engine house. You had to signal the guy who was running the engine at the top of, in the engine house, you had to signal him that cars were coming up. And he lifted the cars at different speeds. So by pulling on the wire, you had to signal. And it was one ring on the bell for a coal car, 2 rings for a freight car, 3 rings for a passenger car. So since we're passengers, we got to be prepared. We got to indicate the engine house. That's 1, 2, 3. Now he's going to kick it into place. And I think they did this because, I mean, you can't throw coal back into its seat, but if you're a passenger, you don't want to get, you know, thrown out of the seat. So that's the one thing I haven't been able to find, is how the different speeds that they may have raised the cars at. That's the one thing I haven't been able to find out. There are mysteries of the Gravity. I mean, I've been studying the Gravity for 40 years, and there's still things I haven't been able to explain. So now we're at the top of plane 1. This is, we're looking back on Carbondale. We just left. Here are the posts that carry the wire up to the engine house that we just signaled the engineer. So here we're leaving Carbondale in the background, and up here I've made notice. Put an indication. Louis Hensel was a famous photographer who did a lot of photography of northeastern Pennsylvania, and most of the pictures you're going to see today are from this set he did called A Ride on the D&H Canal Company Gravity. He's one of my favorite photographers. He did really good work. So now we've left Carbondale behind. And the breaker I just mentioned that was off of Belmont Street, it was a Watkins Sons and Company's breaker. And this is Hensel number 39. This is another Hensel photograph. But this, I'm always amazed by breakers, because you don't, if you look in the 1800s, you don't see 2 breakers alike. They are all different construction. And the one thing you have to note about a breaker, you notice how tall breakers are, because breakers operated on gravity like the railroad does. They would haul the coal to the top of the breaker, and then it would pass through the breaker, be broken up, separated, cleaned, whatever. You know, the breaker boys would do their thing, and it worked its way through gravity down to the bottom, and then hauled off, and then down to plane number 1 and off to Honesdale.
Do you know where that was on Belmont Street?
I have, there's a map I have. The maps from that time are very roughly made. But again, Belmont Street, remember, behind that whole hillside was undeveloped at the time. You know, behind, you know, from Belmont up to White's Crossing. So I think.
That's right. Well,
oh, okay. Then you should know better than me. No, I'm just kidding.
I've never heard of that.
This is where I finally found a good picture in Cassier's magazine, which was an engineering magazine in 1895. They came to our area to document the Gravity. So what you see here is, here are the two stationary engines in the engine house. Here's the, again, I'm going to try to get out of your way. Here's the drum. It turned a large drum with a cable on it. That cable went down the plane, and you lifted the cars, and you know, as the drum turned, it lifted the cars up the plane. Unfortunately, I'm too far away from my computer now. Now, this is from the D&H Century of Progress magazine. This is plane number 2. And again, we're back to 1 track, because again, it's a one-way railroad. You only need the 1 track. That other track we saw at plane 1 was bringing the coal from the breaker. Now, this is the key to how you could run passenger service. Above plane number 2 above the engine house, there was a switchback. They built a switchback so you could ride a passenger car up to plane number 2. Beyond the engine house, there was a switchback, which was a side spur. So you run the car off to a side spur, which then, because the light track coming back from Honesdale came close proximity to plane number 2, you could then ride down to Archibald, because it was Archibald, what is it, Archibald Jessup Oliphant. Do I have my towns right? Yeah. So this is the bridge you would be on if you were on, see there's the engine house up here, the switchback goes off to the side over here, swings around, crosses the plane, and then meets up with the light track over there on your way, so you could take a ride down to Archibald or Oliphant. So that's up, oh.
Can you zoom in on those pictures now? Through the computer?
Oh, come on, Bruce. You know, I mean, give me a break. I couldn't get the thing started, and you want Zoom.
I'm curious because the cable is sitting on looks like rollers in the center.
Right.
And I don't know if they're pulley rollers where they rotate or if they're just...
Oh, no, they do rotate. You have two cables. You have the lifting cable and the trailing cable. The lifting cable is the one, go ahead.
But I didn't know if those rollers, the cable would roll on them or slide.
No, they, as far as I knew, they rule. They had an axle.
I have something that looks just like those rollers that I was curious as to whether that came from there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was a guy who... up in Wayne County, there was a part of the gravity, and he found all these rollers that were down in the river near his house or whatever. So I guess they, weren't worth scrapping. But no, those rollers. Actually, there's an antique dealer up in South Canaan who's got some rollers on display from the gravity. They are typical like pulleys.
Definitely a stumped man.
But you're asking me to do something technical. Come on, give me a break. I'm 66 years old. When I had computer science, I had to punch cards. All right, come on, give me a break here. Okay, now this is we're up to plane number 3. We're still rising up out of Carbondale, and here's again the same setup. This is part of the mystery of the gravity. I can't figure out why this is here. There are no places for cables. There's no places for pulleys. Also, this is you're heading up the hill. The engine house is on the top of the hill for plane number 3. Here are 3 or 4. There's 4 lumber cars. They're on this side track. Now, why you would store cars in the middle of a plane is beyond me. I mean, in other words, you could have left them in the yard in Carbondale. You could have left them on a side spur. I don't understand why you would, it's like parking a car on a hill and drive. You know what I'm saying? You wouldn't do that because, and obviously this has been derailed so it wouldn't run down. But I don't know, this is again a mystery. Why these are here, why he's standing there, I don't know. But this is the operating plane. And this actually might have been from the early years of the gravity when they had a different track, and they just left the rail in place. Again, it's something I haven't been able to resolve. Why? Because you saw on plane 2 there was a single track. Why on plane 3 is there a double track? I don't know. I don't know that. But again, one of the mysteries I haven't been able to solve in 40 years. Now, this is one of the most photographed spots on the gravity. This is the Racketbrook Coal Breaker. Now, for those of you who are familiar, I'm from Simpson, right? So if you're going to the Casey Highway and you drive to Simpson, go up through White's Crossing, and where White's Crossing meets Business Route 6, that is the rough area. That is where roughly where the Racketbrook Coal Breaker was. Okay, and you see all that, and again, we're going to see a later picture of it. There was a lot of changes to this breaker over there. It saw a lot of activity. And, well, let me get to the next one because it's a closer picture. I want to point something out to you. Okay. And again, you see all this, there's all this expansion that's happened to the breakers, and this has been added. So the cars, now, you're looking, again, you see there are 2 tracks over here, right? So we're back to a 2-track plane, but not really. This track over here, you see this little mechanism right here? This is called a mule, not a mechanical mule. And For a breaker to work, you have to get the coal to the top of the breaker. So down here, any coal that's coming from the Racketbrook mine is coming in to the bottom of the breaker. You need it to the top of the breaker. This plane here, we're going to see a better picture of it in a minute, is actually raising the cars up to take to the back of the breaker, to enter the breaker from the top, and then be processed. So do we call this plane 4A? I don't know. Again, how you define a plane. This is the plane that's going all the way. There's the engine house at the top. This is the plane that continues on. This one only goes to the top of the breaker. Plane number 4 is probably, I think I know why it was photographed so much, because if Disneyland wanted to put a ride in for coal breakers, this is what they would use, because you can see the gravity runs along the side of the breaker. The breakers generally had windows. You could see the whole operation from your gravity car, okay? And at the top of this breaker, at the engine house at the top of plane 4, the engineer was a man by the name of Lagrange Wright. People would actually go to his engine house to see it, because he took great pride in his engine house, obviously. He had, you know, back in the 1800s, when you had some, you know, the cast iron mechanical machine, they were made very fancy. They weren't just made very plain. He had his stationary engines painted in bright colors. On the walls of his engine house, he had, they said, 100 or more paintings, lithographs, and different. It was like an art gallery. So people would actually go to his engine house to you know, see the artwork. It was like going to a little museum. I don't know if they stopped the gravity train. I mean, you know how trains are. You don't want to stop a train like, hey, we're going to get off here and we're going to go look at paintings, because they had things to run. And I just remembered, now that I'm talking about the engine house, I missed something in the presentation. Forgive me. Plane number 2, we were talking about where the switchback is. Under Murphy's Law, the worst case scenario is, if there's going to be a problem on the gravity, where would you not want it? The engine house on plane number 2. Well, in 1884, I think I got my dates right, there was a fire. Because those of us who grew up in, well, when I grew up, you had the diamond matches, the big wooden matches that came in the box. Well, it was determined, according to the newspaper account, that in the engine house of plane number 2, the mice chewed into the box of matches and dragged them. And you know those matches, you could strike those on anything and they're going to start on fire. So the mice started the engine house at plane number 2 on fire. They ended up laying off half the gravity employees, because now you couldn't run passenger service on the valley. You couldn't do anything. Engine house pretty much crippled the operation until they could get it fixed. So I apologize for not remembering that. Again, you know, I do forget things sometimes when I'm doing a presentation. I forget, you know, I try not to. So you're at plane number 4, and we're going to head to the top of the plane. Oh, sorry, we want to say hello to the employees. They thought there was an employee group picture for the employees of plane number 4. Everything that you're seeing in this presentation were photographs at one time in my collection. Now that I've gotten older, I'm passing it on to the next generation of historians. I've been selling off parts of my collection. And I offered, whenever I would show this picture, I would say, you know, if there's anybody who worked at plane number 4 on the gravity, you know, if they could identify. Because unfortunately, another thing I tell people is, please go home and put names on your pictures. Because you may know somebody on the picture, and you may know everybody on the picture, but when you're gone, people are going to say, I don't know who these people are. There's not a single name on the back of this, and you would think for a group shot, they would have included the names. And this must have been at the start of the shift, because they all have clean faces. Yeah. Now, here we are at the top of the plane. Now, you'll see that there's only the one track, because that other plane brought cars up this way, around here, and now here these cars are now on their way into the top of the breaker for processing. But they were brought up, and it's hard to see. If I wish they had a car here, because the track actually runs right here, along here, and then back. It does a switchback itself to get to the top of the breaker. And you see, they had to build this for all the culm that was taken out, you know, separated at the breaker. Now, because I said this was would be an ideal ride for Disneyland, and New York is where our coal was going, right? I was amazed to find a postcard on eBay. At Coney Island, one of the most famous amusement parks in the country, they built the Great Coal Mine Tour. And it resembles a coal breaker. And when I gave one of my speeches, somebody who was more ambitious than I was when it comes to the internet, because I've struggled searching for things on the internet, sent me the history, and because I wondered what this was like inside. And according to the history they gave me, you rode in a coal car, a clean coal car. Obviously, they're not going to put you in a coal-filled coal car or a dust-filled coal car. And you rode through the process of mining coal, processing coal, the whole process of it. So they found it interesting enough, and I have to wonder if it was someone who was riding the Gravity and was coming through on plane number 4 and said, hey, this would make a great ride for Coney Island, because obviously somebody thought it was worthwhile. Now we're back, okay, so we're at the top of plane number 4 here, and here you can see the smokestacks from plane 3, 2, and 1 in the background, so the engine houses, that was one of the, and there's also a walkway crossing plane number 4. That might have been the people to get to the engine house to see all the artwork. So we're still moving up the mountain, and here you see, okay, here's plane number 2. Here's the switchback that crosses over. So you got plane number 2, the engine house on plane number 2, and you see how close the light track and the heavy track. So this is the heavy track going on, and this is the light track coming back. Sorry, wait a minute, plane number 3, no, sorry, this is a crossover here. So you have the switchback to get onto the light track. You have plane number 3, Racket Brook Breaker, and you see up here, those of you who come back next week when we come Honesdale back, this is another switchback where it's above plane number 5, where one of the most famous spots on the Gravity was a place called Shepherd's Crook, which we'll see in more detail next week. But again, you could ride up to plane number 2 and ride down to Oliphant, or you could ride up to plane number 5 and they could switch back a car, so you could ride out to Shepherd's Crook, which there were picnic grounds and different things. So you could, depending, I don't know how they managed all this, because, the timetables I've seen were 4 distinct stops on the Gravity. So I don't know how they managed all this switching back at the different spots. And here we are at plane 5, and here's one of the areas, again, the switchback we just saw on the map to cross over. And the thing I want to show you on here, we're going to, Bruce will like this because I'm going to zoom in. The reason I wanted to show you this, remember I said sometimes when the planes and the levels were very short, depending on how steep, because someone asked me once why you couldn't run one plane from Carbondale to Farview. I said, it's just not practical. The contour of the land and everything, you had to build it in steps. But you see down here, this is a very short level at the top of plane number 4. So, I mean, you couldn't accumulate too many cars here, so you have the cars ready to come up plane number 5. But here you have the engine house over here, and this little shack at the top was the person who was controlling the cars as they were coming up. He would sit. Who's that? Oh. A virtual voice. And unfortunately, there are no pictures of plane 6 and 7, something I've never been able to find. And this is the only picture I found of plane 8, and this is actually beyond the top of plane 8, which you have, this is the level that's going off to Farview, where we're going to start descending down into Waymart. So this is the only picture I've ever been able to find of plane 8, and actually you see the spur here with a coal car, because again, you've got stationary steam engines. You need to run them, right? You need to create steam. So they needed their own coal. So again, we're up here now, and we're heading back down. We're going to start heading down to Waymart. We've taken all the steps up. Now, this is one of the, again, the mysteries of the gravity that I haven't been able to figure out. This is the levels for plane 8 and 20. So you've got plane 8, plane 20. Now, why is it confusing to me? Well, remember, you're running the cars by gravity, right? So when they run from plane 8, you want them running downhill so that they'll go to plane 9, right? So you want a little incline down. But when the ones coming back from Honesdale that are coming from plane 20, which is the engine house for plane 20s up here, you want them running in the other direction. So it's a little confusing to me how these, in other words, you want some kind of incline. So it seems like, this should be tilted a different direction than this one. So it's one of those mysteries I haven't been able to solve, that you could have levels going in two different directions without having a differential between the two tracks. So again, one of those mysteries I haven't been able to solve. And we have the Farview Station at the top of the hill, which we're going to be coming to up here. Now, here we are at the Farview Station. Now, people originally thought, they said, is this the station that you see outside of Farview Hospital? No. That station that's there is from the steam railroad that replaced the gravity. This station no longer exists. But this is one of those cases, remember I said before the presentation, I said history is determined by consumer behavior. Railroads, and not only the D&H Gravity, the Laurel Line, the Northern Electric, all these railroads, they want you to ride the railroad to promote passenger service. So they built places for you to go. Farview is not a town by itself. Farview is a spot. In this case, it was a Farview built. They built a park, baseball field, running track, picnic grounds, towers, a place for you to go, for you to ride the railroad. Okay? And I think it's the next. Yes, you could have a tin type made. A tin type, there's a painting of the station, so you could get, if you had to prove to somebody in your family that you were actually at the Farview Station, get your picture taken in front of the painting. There were towers. Now, this is a tower before a roof was put on it. Now, early on, the D&H was, they hesitated in doing passenger service. The reason you didn't have passenger service to Honesdale until 1877, they were so focused on the coal. They saw no value in running passenger service, which to me was a huge mistake. Because, think about it. Coal has to be mined. It has to be transported. It has to go all the way to New York City. God knows how long it was before they actually got their money for the coal, right? You run a passenger car, passengers load themselves, and they unload themselves, and they pay in cash when they're getting on the train. You're not waiting for a bill. This place was so popular that there was I said I wasn't worried about dates, but I want to make sure I get my date right here. Yeah, it was September 18th of 1898. They had 14,763 people visit Farview Park. That's how many tickets they sold on the Gravity to that park. Now, let me put that in perspective. I looked up the current population of Carbondale and the current population of Honesdale. Together, they're still less than 14,763 people. I mean, I can't imagine that many people. I mean, this is not a stadium up there. This was picnic grounds, and I mean, that's a crowd of people to be there. But again, they didn't think that passenger service, actually, when they started passenger service, I was laughing at this when I saw it in the book. They started 2 cars for passenger service to Honesdale. It was so popular that in 2 weeks' time, they ordered 3 more cars to be built at the shops in Carbondale, possibly one of the ones you guys are working on. But again, talk about not anticipating, what people wanted. And when I'm talking to kids especially, I say it was so popular that it's credited, the Gravity is credited with an invention that is used today, is very popular today. And we know that as Come on, guys, you've heard my speeches before. Roller coaster, exactly. Because that's how a roller coaster works. You have an initial lift, and then the rest of the time you're just riding by gravity. There's no motor in those cars. So the gravity, it was such a popular ride for people that, you know, we still have it today in a different form. Oh, this is the Farview Tower with the roof on it. And this is one of my favorite pictures. I think this would be a lawyer's favorite picture because I always say, you know, everybody thinks that dangerous selfies, you know, people take selfies of themselves in dangerous situations like it's something new. No. As long as there's been photography, people have been putting their life at risk for the sake of a picture. So this guy is on top of the tower. Now, these towers were popular because they were 100-foot high towers on top of the mountain. So you're at the highest point of the Music Mountains, plus you're another 100 feet up. It was said that you could see 4 states from that tower. How you would prove this, I don't know. You could see Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Now, personally, I've driven the road out to Newburgh, New York, and when you climb that high hill, I don't know how you could see Connecticut from this tower. But again, who's going to prove them wrong? You know, it's a good selling point, right? But it was a popular spot. And this is the view looking back. You're looking at Keenes Pond, Waymart, and you're looking toward Honesdale. So you did get a good view. Here's Connecticut, in case you guys didn't recognize it. And just to show you, this is one of the maps I had. Here you see, there's the lower observatory. So there were 2 towers. So you have the lower observatory, and if you went due north from there, you have the upper observatory. You have baseball fields, picnic grounds. I don't know where the running track was. There's a cottage. You have the station. So there was about a mile difference between, you walk between the 2 towers. So there was a large area there for Farview. So 14,763, you know, it was reasonable. I have to wonder though, you know, back then, did they have food? I mean, I know you could get your picture taken. I'm wondering if you could send a telegram from Farview. I don't know. I don't know what was in the station, because to get to Farview, you already had bought your ticket. So they really didn't need to sell tickets coming back, because you had to buy, you know, a ticket to go there, unless, you know, they were only selling one-way tickets. But generally, you sold tickets in 2 directions. So here we are. Here's the station we saw. We have, this is plane 20, here's plane 9 over here. This is the descending plane going down. We're heading down to Waymart now. Here's a series of coal cars. Here's a walkway. Again, you know, you don't want to get people killed trying, I mean, the gravity doesn't run at a fast speed. I don't know why they actually felt the need to have a walkway, but I guess, you know, safety first. Sorry, I was on to tell you something and I lost my train of thought. Don't get old. So, some of the things that in reading technical manuals on the gravity that I wish we had pictures of, but it was in the earlier years of the gravity, like we had the stationary steam engines. Some of the planes were actually run by water wheels. These huge water wheels that were developed, very large, and they weren't water wheels in the sense that a lot of times when you see a grist mill or something, you have the wheel and the water is coming in from the top. They were all undershot wheels. It wasn't very efficient, but that's probably why they got rid of it. But the one thing I read in the descending planes coming from Farview down to Waymart, there was this braking system they used where they had these 8-foot fans. And I guess the way the blades were turned, through air resistance, they were slowing the cars. I wish to God I had a picture of this, because I would have loved to seen this on operation. I don't know how successful this was, but they did air braking going down the hills. Plane number 11, again, we don't have any pictures of plane 10. Plane 11, we're descending into Waymart. And again, we're doing it in steps, because you cannot make a plane too long, because you know when you're dealing with cables and everything, you know, if a cable breaks, it's going to go, it's going to go from Farview all the way down to Waymart at whatever speed it can build up if you don't control how, you know, how long the cables are or how long the planes are.
So when you say they were breaking, are they at a cable that's being braked, or are they free, like just running free with a brake?
No, they can't, no, there were cable, let's see. You have cable, well, this is attached here. So here's a cable for, I'm trying to think, plane, view down plane 18 with passenger train. So 18, plane 12, this is the descending plane. So there is a cable lowering it in, and this says the passenger train is on plane 18, so you're ascending plane 18. The planes in and out of Waymart were right next to each other. When you went from from Farview down, the descending planes and the ascending planes were parallel to each other. So they could have used the same engine house because, well, you had to control it. You couldn't just let it, you didn't have a guy running a brake that I've ever seen. I mean, if there's a picture, I've never seen one. Because he would have to be, well, again, these guys are posing, so I don't know if he's actually running anything or he's just posing.
If I could interject something.
Go ahead.
I believe it's Wales today, Festina Railroad is running. They use traditional steam engines to get their train to the top of the plane. But going back down, and this is a slate harvesting railroad, you have 10 or 20 slate cars. Each car has a brakeman on it with a piece of wood and a little hand horn. They're still running it like that today. When they want to put on the brakes, they signal with their horn and just hold.
You mean a piece of wood actually rubbing against the wheel?
Yeah.
And that works?
Yeah. Yeah, there's videos on YouTube of it. And that's still up and running today.
Because I know
These had brake wheels on them, which are no different from the brake wheels you see on the trains today. As you turn it, it reels in a chain or a cable, and the brake shoes connect with the wheels.
So you had, well, I'm trying to figure out,
Because the brake
I'm sorry.
would have been right where he said.
wait, I got two, what?
I believe from what I remember reading, and there was another document about it, mainly on the return trip after rebuild. They had areas where if you weren't on the cable, when instead of free rolling, there would be an occasional hump that would go up, and that would of course slow down the car.
Yep.
The brakemen at that point were just there in case they needed to stop an emergency, but every car had a brakeman.
Well, so you'd have to engage the brake from the top of the hill. I mean, here's Waymart down, here's the station in Waymart. You're still a good distance away, so you'd be sitting on the brake the whole way.
Which is why Lappin Brake Shoe Company in Hudson, New York was making so much money.
Because they're going through a lot of brakes.
Yep.
How many cars are hooked together?
Well, in this case, we have two. There's two passenger cars. Generally on the planes, I mean, I've seen 2 and 3 coal cars hooked together. I've never seen a train of coal cars and passenger together.
There's 2 men there, one standing outside and one in the back. It looks of it, so they could have been the 2 brakemen on
Right.
each car, one on each car.
Yep.
Well, from what I see, this is one of the Hensel photographs. That also could be Hensel, because I find him in a lot of his own photographs. You know? Because he's wearing a suit.
Yep.
I don't know. It's one of there are technical questions I've had about, I was actually talking to an engineer friend because I was asking him questions about what he thought about the gravity, and he says he couldn't figure out how some things worked as it was, because you have the drum lifting. How how do you release the drum? Now, again, the technical side of the gravity, and again, I was an engineering student before I was an accounting major. I asked many questions about this. How did this happen, or how did that happen? And there was a D&H symposium that Dr. Steers, who was a big authority on the gravity, he wrote the symposium, and I've read it numerous times, and it still left me with a number of questions. I mean, ideally, I wish I could transport myself back 150 years and see this in operation, because there are parts, and I'm going to ask you later if you understand what some of the parts are, but right now, I just wanted you guys to experience the ride. I'm not that strong on engineering of the gravity, because there's been so many questions I've had myself.
Possible there are two drums, one to pull up and one to delete to back the cars as they go down?
See, that's the thing. If you have the drum, you have the lifting drum, but then you would need a separate, go ahead, what?
If the return cable is one's pulling, as long as you have a couple of rounds, you can let one car go down while you pull the other one up. Yeah. Because if you're having a pulling, you still have to get the cable out and get the other cars up.
Well, you see, that's why on a lifting plane, you had the lifting cable and the trailing cable, and the trailing cable is the one that brings the cable back down the hill. Okay. That's what I understand, and it's not like the two sides are connected together. In other words, the weight of one car is not, the weight of one car coming down is lifting the other car going up. They're not connected in that way. So, well, again, when we get to plane number 13, there's a question I have of how they did the engine house on plane 13, because engineering-wise, it doesn't make any sense, because you've got two planes coming into one engine house, two lifting planes. But again, that's for next week's presentation. You got to come back for that. Sorry. So here we are in Waymart. And I think this guy is just a poser, because he's too well dressed up to be a guy working on the...
There's no cable there in the tracks. So.
Well, you're right here, this is the yard. This is the Waymart yard, okay? You are when you lowered the cars here, this is the heavy track on its way to Honesdale, and you see there's multiple tracks, and this is the light track. This is the track coming back from Honesdale. This is a side track. There's actually a workshop, and I don't think I have that picture in this presentation, but this is a spur going into a workshop to work on the cars. This is the track coming back from Honesdale. See, what they did was, remember, on the planes, you could only take up so many cars at a time. You saw how short the level was above plane 4, so you could only fit a couple of cars. So what they did was, the goal was, get to Waymart. In Waymart, we have multiple tracks. There's 3 tracks here. They would build trains. So you would send maybe 30 cars at once leaving Waymart, because there's no more lifting planes. When you leave Waymart, and I always tell people this, when I go to, I want you to think about this, the level between Waymart and Honesdale was 10 miles long. No lifting planes. So when let's say you're going on Route 6, and you're at the light in Waymart, and you go through that light, those cars left that point and went all the way nonstop to Honesdale, with no stops. Yeah. So you could build as big a train as you wanted, because you didn't have to worry about any lifting planes past that point. And we'll see pictures of those trains on their way to Waymart, on their way to Honesdale. So here we have Waymart, and you have the light track and the heavy track coming close proximity. You have the heavy track going around one side of Kings Pond, the light track coming back on the other side. So you're on both sides of Kings Pond after you leave Waymart. And again, I wish I had pictures of the entire, and this is the Waymart yards. This is where they're building a train to head off to Honesdale. So you have, I don't know if there was a limit, because, once you let the cars start rolling, did it really matter how many cars you had? And you had 3 guys on every coal train, from what I understood. You had a guy on the lead, a guy in the middle, and a guy at the end. Because back then you didn't have cross traffic.
Yeah.
There was no cross traffic. and then we move on through Prompton, Sealyville, and I don't think it's on this map, but you know, you go through the village of Steen on your way to Honesdale. So how was Steen named? How do you think they named Steen? Because the plane was number 16. That's how they came up with the name Steen. Okay, here we are. Okay, now you see, this is one train on its way to Honesdale. You see the length of this. These are all cars on their way to Honesdale. And the reason I have these side by side is sometimes when you're dealing with Hensel, he would print a list of his pictures on the back of his stereo views. And the one thing I found out through this, he would take multiple pictures of the same area and give them the same number, because it is Keens Lake. In both pictures, it's Keens Lake. So he didn't have to come up with a new number or name. Unfortunately now, it complicates it because in the series, there's 67 pictures. Well, now they're not all, there is different versions of it, so God knows how many there are pictures there are. But you see here's, again, slightly different angle, same trestle. And the one thing, that had to be a great, the reason they must have loved the gravity back in the 1800s, there were a lot of trestles, there was a lot of high works, especially, you know, through Carbondale, it was a high works. So these people who are riding the gravity, the thing I love about train rides is when you're on the Casey Highway, right? To build a Casey Highway, they cleared 2 lanes and shoulders and a median, and 2 more lanes and shoulders and a median. So when you're on the highway, you pretty much see the highway. When you're in a train, you don't see the wheels underneath you, and when you look out the window, all you can see is what you can see out the window. So when you're traveling this high up through the air, it's the closest thing they could have the feeling of flight. It had to be, they must have loved this trip. I wish I could have gone back to ride this, because this had to be an incredible ride, especially the open air cars. Because again, all you can see is the open air aside you, and you're well above, I mean, going through Carbondale, you actually rode over Carbondale, over the high works. Here's another case. This is plane number 16, where again, the heavy track and the light track crossed over. And again, you know, the passenger car, these same 2 passenger cars, I kind of think these are the same 2 passenger cars we've seen. You know, the photographer might have been on the cars and they stopped them somehow to take the picture, because otherwise, you know, how do you have the same 2 cars? And again, everybody's gathered for the photo. But this is plane 16. This is one, let me ask you a question. This is one of the mysteries I've asked a number of people about. This is the counterweight, right? What is it countering?
All right, depending on what it is, that works along with the low descending cable.
See, when I think of a counterweight, I think of, you know, like these big cranes they have where you have the arm of the crane here and you have the counterweight on the other side, right? So you have something that looks like a well here, right? And you have the wheels.
That's probably exactly what it is, because, let me get this right. Dad, Jimmy, Fred, Thomas. Great-great-grandfather was what they called the head man on plane number 2 of the Pennsylvania Coal Company in Pittston.
Okay.
What they had originally was a well, and the way they pulled the original cars up that was there's a bucket inside that they could fill with water. As that got heavier, it pulled down and pulled the cars up the plane. And they could control how much water and how fast was coming out of it to return them back down.
Okay, but but again, when I think of a counterweight, right? The cable, look at the length of this plane.
Yeah.
So if the cable that's attached to this has to be the length of that plane, doesn't the counterweight have to be able to drop that far?
Depending how long your lift is, because sometimes you would have a plane that would go up so far, and then the Barney car or I forget the other name.
But they didn't have Barney cars on, the only Barney car was that one on plane 4 we saw, that little lifting car. That's the only one that they had on the Gravity. That was, the Barney cars were used heavily on the Ma-Chunk, the switchback in Ma-Chunk. But,
Ashley and,
right, but on the D&H, I mean, that's why this has been one of those mysteries. I've been talking to engineers saying, well, when you have a counterweight, you're counterweighting what? And that's one of the reasons. But since it came up on the picture and we were talking about mysteries. But again, we're on plane 16. This is plane 16 leaving Honesdale. And again, we're still on the level. We're still riding from Waymart up to Honesdale on the level, the 10-mile level.
If you think about the old windows in the houses, they had the counterweights to help people.
Right. But again, but the counterweight, so the counterweight, when it's in the frame, it's up this high, and when you lift the window all the way up, the counterweight is now down to the bottom. So that's the distance it's going to go.
Mechanical
If
system.
that goes to a barrel, a larger diameter barrel, you can quadruple it.
Okay.
The size of the bucket.
Well, then, but why build it, like, I've seen it go into the ground. I've seen other pictures where this well structure where it goes into the ground. So why would you build it below ground? If you had a barrel that you could keep rolling it around, why would you?
Maybe that's what turned the barrel away.
I don't know. Again, today we're experiencing the ride. If you want to get into technicalities, then we got to get engineers, because it's been one of those things. This is the Passaic. This is one of the fancy passenger cars. It has an indoor seating area and an outdoor seating area. And the reason I included this is on this ride, when they started passenger service in 1877, right? What's the worst case scenario you could have? If you were operating the Gravity and you were the engineer, or you were running or if you were the conductor on the car, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, the Passaic ran off the track with the superintendent of the railroad on it, ran down the hillside. Now, it doesn't look good, but the car was made so well, nobody was injured. I mean, they ran off the road down the side, but I mean, again, worst case scenarios, and it's just when they started passenger operation, 1877 to Honesdale. So again, worst case scenarios, but it was one of the more beautiful cars they made. I mean, I used to love there's another car, I think it might be this one back here, where they had like swivel exterior chairs back here.
No, the brake wheel is right behind the guy on the front.
Wait, the what?
Brake wheel.
This one right here, right.
That's the brake wheel.
But nobody's manning it at the time.
They don't need to.
You don't need to?
Nope. You can
Okay.
turn that on. See, when you turn that, it's on a ratchet. And you can ratchet that either way. You kick the, I forget what they call it.
Okay, but
the dog out of the way if you want to let it off.
when we're coming back next week, I mean, when you leave Farview and you go nonstop to Archibald, that brake wheel is engaged for 12 miles?
It depends on what the grade is, and, you know, an experienced brakeman is going to know, I can let
Right.
this thing fly like a demon
Right.
until I get to this place I know about, know there's a curve coming up, so I'm going to slow it down.
Right.
Once he gets past that curve, he'll take a slight strain on the brake wheel, kick the ratchet dog out of the way, and let it off a little bit and let it catch where it needs to.
Well, so obviously it's fully engaged here because they had to stop it for the picture.
Oh, quite
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
Quite probably.
But-
Now, who used a club they put in between the spokes of the...
Right. Well, I've seen the clubs in the Waymart yards. They had a whole series of clubs when they didn't want any of the cars to move. Those clubs that they would jam under the wheel. So here we are approaching Honesdale. You're in roughly around. You're coming in around Wayne Memorial Hospital. Here's the engine house for the top of plane number 13. And here is the famous coal pile in Honesdale. It was considered the world's largest coal pile. And the thing that I was wondering how they accumulate so much coal, because everything I read said the canal could carry more coal than the Gravity could provide. So what they did was they ran the Gravity as much as they could in the winter to pile up coal. So this must be the spring thaw coal pile next to the canal. what we're going to see is, oh, and as I said, 1 through 28 planes, this was plane 12 and a half, because when they brought the coal into Honesdale, it came in at ground level. They had a plane to lift the car up to this area where they would then dump them into those coal piles you just saw. So this is numbered plane 12 and a half. So now you're up to, again, the 1 through 28 doesn't hold true. The what?
The only turntable.
And here we have the steam shovel where it really wasn't efficient. The gravity wasn't an efficient system in that they had to lift the coal many times, loading and reloading the coal. So you had a steam shovel so you had the cars come in up 12 and a half, dump the coal into the coal piles. Now when it came time to load the canal boats, you had to run another series of cars. The steam shovel would come and fill the cars to then put into the canal boats. And here's where, into the canal boats. Now this is a sidebar, because again, I'm always asking the question, how did you do something? Because coal cars have doors that you can open and unload. And it always bothered me, you're sending a canal boat to Rondout, New York. How do you empty a canal boat? Because if you put a door on the bottom of a canal boat, it's going to sink, right? So there is this mechanism, I found this in Scientific American. This arm, which has like a group of scoops on it on a belt, goes down into the boat, lifts the coal out and raises it and dumps it into a pile. But I was just curious as to how it's easy to get it into the coal, you just dump it into the canal boat. How do you get it out of the canal boat? So that's just a little sidebar, and there's the Scientific American showing the operation. And again, it was quite an extensive operation in Rondout, New York. Now, again, the 1 through 28 on the planes. In Honesdale, you had the only named plane. It was called the Union plane. You had plane 13, but you also had the Union plane. And again, this is the operation. The Union plane was on one side of the operation where the steam shovel was taking coal out of the coal piles. Plane 13 was on one side of that. The Union plane was on another side of that. And then this is going to be one of the mysteries when we get to the engine house on plane 13, because I don't know how they ran the engine house with two planes coming from two different directions. This was a mystery for the longest time to me. I had this picture in my collection, the coal pockets. Now you saw pictures of the coal pockets I just showed you, right? Then there's this coal pockets, right? And it says D&H Canal Company Pockets, Honesdale, Pennsylvania. This is not downtown Honesdale. This confused, for the longest time I couldn't figure out what was going on here, because here's coal pockets, here's where the cars come under to receive the coal. So I'm like, how can this be? So you go out and you buy yourself a map, right? Okay, now, you remember I said you have the heavy track and the light track, and it's kind of a misnomer. It's always been said plane 13 is the first plane on the light track. Most of the time it is. And again, how many planes? 1 through 28. Here is the D&H coming in from Waymart. Here's the track, right? You see this other track over here? These are the coal pockets in where I said is the world's largest coal pile. Those coal pockets are over here. Okay? This, you have to go up plane 13. You have to lift the filled cars back up plane 13. Here is another plane over here, and another plane, and you dump the coal over here into this separate set of pockets that is opposite where Wayne Memorial Hospital is. So plane 13 is doing double duty. It's always considered light track, but in this case, if cars come around and there's no room in the regular pockets, they populate these up here. But again, now you have to send cars up here, load them again, bring them around, and dump them in the canal basin.
Where would Wayne Memorial be in that?
Wayne Memorial is over here. Because you're coming in, here's the D&H track coming in, from Waymart that we saw. And the engine house, here's the engine, you remember I saw the engine house on top of the hill? Here's the engine house that we saw from the bottom of the hill. So Wayne Memorial would be about over here somewhere. Now again, this is, late 1800s. A lot of changes to, the buildings, the structures. Obviously the cemetery is, I'm assuming the cemetery is still there, because I mean, if the cemetery was there back then, I don't know, cemetery in Carbondale now is a skate park. So I don't assume anything anymore. But this is one of those, again, here are 2 additional planes that are on the gravity. So now we're up, this is where we get up to the 33, because very inefficient. You get the cars, ideally, what would have been perfect is you bring the cars around, they come from Waymart, you dump them right in the canal boats and you ship them off. But that's not how the operation ran. So we are in Honesdale, and when I first did this presentation, it went 3.5 hours at the Lackawanna Historical Society, and it was too much for me. 2 of the sweetest women I've ever known, 2 of the founding members, Barb and Sandy, of the Waymart Area Historical Society. God help them, they're gone now, or God bless them, they're gone now. But I said, hey, I need a transition slide so I can, so currently we are stuck in Honesdale. If you want to see from Honesdale back to Carbondale, that's next week's presentation, because I can't do 3.5 hour presentations anymore. It just wears on me. But that's Barb, that's Sandy, and 2 of the sweetest women I've ever known, and I missed them. And I said, don't look happy in the picture. You have to look like you're stuck. So, David, you got lights?
I'm right here.
Oh, John's right here. Yes, they're restoring a gravity car in car number 3.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you tell the story. You know better than me.
Can I just say something first before we
Go
get
ahead.
into this?
Oh, wait, sorry.
I just wanted, before we get into anything else, I just want to tell everyone, thank you so much for coming tonight, and that John Revak is going to do another presentation. We've already mentioned that.
Yeah.
It's next Saturday.
It's the other half.
The other half at 7 o'clock.
At 7 o'clock.
Okay, so. And
Saturday.
John has graciously donated his time to the Historical Society because he loves this. So
I give presentations over a 3-county area. I have 8 different presentations I do, and it's not only the gravity. Again, we had the 3D presentation
last year, which was
where those of you who remember the 3D movies in the 60s where you wear the red and blue glasses. Yeah. The stereo views that I have in my collection, those of you, does everybody know what a stereo view is? You have the 2 pictures. Okay, well I got software to convert the 2 pictures into one single picture that shows up on the screen as you have a red picture, a blue picture, and a black picture. And when you wear the glasses, you see everything in 3D. So you see, you're viewing the 1800s in 3 dimensions. So that was the last one I did, and I have.
Maybe we could redo that another time. Would that be okay with you?
Oh, I don't know.
It's too much.
It's like, no.
Well, we don't mean right away.
No, we can do it. We can do it.
Well,
or Bruce might have me do it in German. You can come down to German to see it.
Yeah, but it is.
That's another thing. I am glad to see Bruce and Cody here, because I'm a firm believer in that historical societies should support one another.
Oh, I agree completely.
So I know Eric came down. Where's Eric? Eric came down to German when I did the one in German. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important.
Yeah. So anyway, I'd like to thank everyone, and remember that the Historical Society is here for you, and we need your support, and graciously accept any donations that you would make to ours and to any other historical society.
I'm going to pass this over to you since you're the expert. I'm just a pawn.
And hopefully we'll see you all next week. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.